This is Professor Charlie Evans, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about the idea of modernization. After all, the title of the unit that we're in right now in the course is Worldwide Modernization, covering the period of time from 1945 to the present, and implying that significant change has occurred in much of the world in this last 50 or 60 years, and bringing much of the world into the modern world and making countries and societies modern. And so, what exactly does that mean? One standard definition of modernization that you'll find it in a lot of places is modernization, the transformation from a traditional rural agrarian society to a secular urban industrial society. So let me just repeat that. The transformation from a traditional rural agrarian society to a secular urban industrial society. Now, some points about that. Usually historians consider modernization to have taken place in a period of time from the 17th century to the 20s, the start of the 20th century in Western Europe and America. There's some slight deviations there in the exact timeline of individual countries or societies, but just roughly that 300-year period of time saw the transformation of Western society uh, from this traditional agrarian society to a modern industrial society in Western Europe and America. Now, uh, that happened much later elsewhere in the world, particularly the countries of Asia and Africa will usually push that really from really most of the 20th century, from 1900 to the present and everything, a lot faster transformation in a much smaller period of time. So what are some? Let me just mention some of the components of what I see as modernization, as typically envisioned by historians. One of them is a change in the class structure of a society to include the appearance of a middle class. Uh, Whatever the original traditional society's class structure, um, the appearance of middle class signals that that class structure has changed and it has become more modern. And one of the ways that middle class manifests itself is in the political modernization of society and the creation of some form of representative democratic government. Um, the actual practice of democracy varies tremendously from society to society, but the fact that there is created some sort of idea of representative government in the societies, usually associated with the middle class, is an indication of a society or country has become modern. Of course, the economic shift from an agricultural, rural-based economy to an urban and industrial-based economy is considered a classic sign of modernization. Um, the decreasing influence of religion in a society is usually taken as part of the modernization process, and that usually goes along with as society becomes more and more urban, the importance of religion and religious practices in that society tends to decrease over time. Um, you have, as we've already mentioned, the creation of an urban society, the increased movement of population to urban centers. Um, Along with that comes increased educational opportunities for society and a general refocusing of the values of a society from a group, from God, I hate to use the word tribe, from an extended family basis to where the individual becomes the most important part of society. And so what you have is this shift from a rural agrarian farming economy to a modern industrial society, which is what most of the world exists at today. Now, uh, the problem with the idea of modernization is, well, there's two problems. One is that it tends to be a value-laden process. And what do I mean by that? But, well, usually when you think of modernization, you think of progress. You think of that somehow a society or culture is modernizing, it is progressing from some sort of old, backward, superstitious farmers to something more modern and something more energetic, something more suitable, something more educated, um, and that the modern is inherently better than what the pre-modern was. Um, and so I'm not sure that's really necessarily the case, that modernization brings a better society and everything, but there is that connection with modernization and progress. Um, and for thinkers in the West, that was a particularly thorny problem for them to confront after World War One and World War Two and the Holocaust. Really called into the question of whether modern society was really improving and getting better with time, even though that the fruits of modern society and the industrial production and everything that went with that, maybe there was still something missing, that there was still something lacking about modern society that had not been improved by modernization. Um, so that's one aspect of a critique of modernization, is this kind of connection of modernization with progress, with the betterment of society. The other problem with modernization, it is really closely associated with the historical process of the Western world. And so what that means is that as societies and states in Africa, East Asia, South Asia, and everything, as they've gone through this modernization process, historians and social scientists have tended to judge their movement along the timeline of modernization uh, according to like how closely they've come to resemble Western European and American society. Um, in other words, modernization has become tied up with the idea of westernization, that uh, a, a culture becomes more modern as it becomes more Western. And that, of course, also gets back to the value laden aspect of modernization. Um, but you see there that there's only just a really kind of few examples where you can look at a society and see um, a transformation going on, a modernization, if we want to use that term, within kind of the cultural confines of that society. In some respects, Japan is the best example of that, but there's still some things that really don't fit with the model. So, getting back to modernization, the period of time that we're talking about in History 112, 112, the last 60 years, um, as much of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, Central Africa, um, even parts of Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Asia have undergone a kind of a modernizing process, um, as their societies and cultures have changed in the last 60 years. Um, they've really kind of confronted this conundrum of like, what is really the modern world? How do they fit in the modern world? How should they fit in the modern world? What aspects of their society should be changed and what shouldn't be changed? A lot of that the societies have really no control over and everything, but it's something to consider as we think about this process of modernization.